Welcome back to the video book Nursing. Today we'll read about cellular and tissue changes, the first part. So let's get started. Cells are the basic structural and functional unit of a living organism. It is a cell's property to actively interact with their environment and constantly adjust their structure and function in order to preserve its essential functions. Cells tend to maintain normal homeostasis. So, what is homeostasis? It is the property of a cell or tissue that allows maintenance and regulation of stability needed for it to function properly. In Hindi, homeostasis is called samasthiti. Now, as in this chart, you can see, as the cell encounters physiologic stress or pathological stimuli, it undergoes adaptation and then it achieves a new steady state in order to preserve its essential functions. But if the adaptive capability of the cell is exceeded, or if the external stress is persistent, harmful cell injury develops. Now, up to a certain limit, the injury is reversible and the cell it returns to a stable baseline. However, severe or repetitive stress it results in irreversible injury and death of the affected cell. And so, therefore, initially the cell adapts to a stressful response. But then, if the stress persists, then the cell undergoes reversible followed by irreversible cell injury, finally leading to the cell death. And so, cellular adaptation, it refers to initial morphological and functional changes that a cell undergoes in response to adverse environmental changes. Adaptive responses thus endow the cell with the capacity to survive in their altered environment and possibly escape a cell injury. The major ways by which the cell adapts are atrophy, hypertrophy, hyperplasia, metaplasia, and dysplasia. And so in this video, we'll deal with the two of the adaptations, the atrophy and the hypertrophy. So the first question, what is atrophy? Atrophy, it is the shrinkage in the size of the cell due to the loss of cell substance. Now, although atrophic cells may have diminished function, they are not dead. Some of the tissues and the organs are especially susceptible to atrophy, and the examples include skeletal muscle, cardiac muscles, gonads, brain, and breast. So, the atrophy it can be physiological and pathological. So, first, the physiological atrophy. It occurs during the early stage of development and during the aging process, which is called the senile atrophy. Now, some examples of the physiologic atrophy are the atrophy of thyroglossal duct and notochord during the fetal development, atrophy of gonads after menopause, and atrophy of brain with aging. Now, the second is pathological atrophy. It occurs in response to pathological stimuli. And so, the examples of pathological atrophy, along with their causes, are as follows. Now, because of inadequate nutrition, prolonged starvation leads to the depletion of carbohydrate and the fat stores, followed by protein catabolism. So, the example of it is severe muscle wasting due to protein catabolism in PEM, protein energy malnutrition, the marasmus. Now, the second example, the pressure atrophy due to any mass, be it a cyst or a tumor, that compresses an adjacent organ. For example, the nerve root tumors compressing the spine. So this comes under the pathological stimuli. Sorry, pathological atrophy. Now, what are the morphological features of atrophy? Now, grossly, the organ appears to be small and shrunken, and on microscopy, the cells appear smaller in size due to the reduction in number of cell organelles. And so, this was all about atrophy. Now, we come to hypertrophy. And so hypertrophy, it is an increase in the size of the cell with consequent increase in the size of an organ without any change in the number of the cell. So in other words, hypertrophy, there are no new cells, just the larger ones of the original cells. So, why does the increase in size occur? It occurs due to the enhanced production of the structural proteins and organelles in response to either the increased functional demands or hormonal stimulation. Now, hypertrophy also can be physiological or pathological. So, few examples of the physiological hypertrophy includes the enlargement of the size of uterus during pregnancy and the hypertrophy of breast during lactation. And the example of pathological hypertrophy are the left ventricular hypertrophy in systemic hypertension and aortic stenosis, hypertrophy of the pyloric muscles of stomach in congenital hypertrophic pyloric stenosis, and compensatory hypertrophy of the remaining kidney following nephrectomy. Now, the morphological feature of hypertrophy. Grossly, the affected organ, it appears enlarged and heavy. And microscopically, there is enlargement of muscle fibers as well as the nuclei. Then the electron microscopy, it reveals an increased number of organelles.